running a little experiment in my garden over the last couple of years. Rather than take the plants out when they flower or go to seed or get a bit unruly, I've just let them be. I've let them do their own thing. And I've observed some interesting results. We now have calendula and sweet peas through our vegetable garden. And we have marigolds and borage turning up in unexpected places. I'm quite intrigued by the single carrot that's put out about 20 flowers and is now going to seed. Kind of wondering what's going to happen with that in the next couple of months. We might have a bountiful harvest of carrots that I didn't plant. It is a little bit chaotic and it's a little bit wild. And as I've sat with this little experiment, here is what I've learned. Firstly, I've learned that calendula will grow just about anywhere and it needs very little encouragement to grow. Secondly, and probably more important for the purposes of this, is that a wild place or a chaotic place is not necessarily somewhere that is barren or without life. And the wilderness, the wild place, is a constant backdrop in the Bible. If you're like me, you may have pictured it as being somewhat desert-like in appearance. It's hot, it's dusty, nothing lives there, not a lot of water. The wilderness can seem like hard work. And the wilderness is the place that the Israelites trudged through for 40 years on their way to the Promised Land. It is the place that Hagar finds herself in when she runs away from Sarai and Abram. It's where Elijah runs to hide when he confronts Jezebel and calls down fire on the prophets of Baal. The wilderness is also the place that Jesus is led into after his baptism. It's the place where he feeds the crowds, heals the sick, sends demons into pigs, and calms the storm. It's also the place where God provides manna for the whinging, complaining Israelites, where he feeds an exhausted Elijah, and where he meets Hagar by a spring of water. From the wilderness comes the prophetic voice of John the Baptist. So actually, the wilderness is not necessarily a bad place. And Brené Brown, in her book Braving the Wilderness, calls it an untamed, unpredictable place of solitude and searching. It is a place that is as dangerous as it is breathtaking and as sought after as it is feared. We don't often seek out the wilderness. It might be the place we run to hide in, but it's not actually a comfortable place to be in. And so we don't like to linger there for too long. The wilderness is the place where we have to face our limitations and find God at the end of them. And I would argue that the Bible makes a case for the wilderness actually being a necessary place. You see, the wilderness is often the place where our faith and our character is tested and formed. And when it comes to being tested in the wilderness, we are in good company. Jesus was tested in the wilderness, and through his trial is shown to be the Son of God, the one through whom we are reconciled to God. The wilderness can become our training ground. It can prepare us for the new thing that God is inviting us to. It might be the stepping stone to the Promised Land, or perhaps a resting and refueling place, or a place of encounter that confirms the next step that we are meant to take. The other thing I've noticed about the wilderness and the wilderness stories in the Bible is that God always shows up. There are Psalms written about it. Psalm 107 recalls God's loyal love shown to the Israelites in the wilderness. The wilderness is the place where God's provision, God's salvation, and God's unfailing love is demonstrated. God always shows up. Sometimes he shows up in unexpected ways, like manna from heaven, or quail just gathered at your feet, or in a burning bush, or in a still small voice after a storm. Sometimes he shows up with words we don't want to hear, or questions we don't want to answer, like, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Or, "Where have you come from, Hagar, and where are you going?" The wilderness is the place where we encounter God. If we would stop to take time to realize that He's actually there. So if you're anything like me, you might want to race through the wilderness experience. Like I said, we don't like being uncomfortable for too long. We want to get through it so we can get to the destination, our version of the promised land. And when we do that, we miss the ways that God is active and at work in the wilderness. We race through and miss the still small voice and the invitation that it extends to us. We see the wilderness as the place that God is not, forgetting that God created it in the first place. And we get anxious, thinking that this is not where we're meant to be, forgetting that the story of creation is the story of God calling order out of chaos, and that the chaos of the wilderness is not at all chaotic to God. Perhaps, instead of running through the wilderness, with our focus on getting out, we should instead learn to embrace the mystery and the beauty of the wilderness. We could take the example of Jesus, who knew that the only way through the wilderness was to trust God implicitly. You see, we are led into the wilderness, but we are also led out of it. God speaks in Isaiah 43 verse 19, and He says, "For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland." We don't have to do it. God leads us into it, and we can trust that He will lead us out of it too, even if the path isn't necessarily the one that we would choose for ourselves.